Good evening to those that are joining. We will start the program here very soon, just allowing a few people to join in. Well, here we go. Welcome this evening to our January program of the WMBA. My name is John Smith, and I'm the president of the board here with the WMBA. And just on behalf of all of us here, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight for this legislative update. And that title is somewhat misleading because we've got a whole lot of things in store for us tonight. I'm going to give a few introductions of our folks that are joining by a panel to discuss tonight's information. After we give an introduction, we'll let them say hello to each of you, and they'll take a couple of seconds to do that. And then we'll get into the program right after all of the introductions are completed. But I'm wondering, before we start, if Rosemarie David is on the call. And if Rosemarie is here, we're going to just give her a moment to talk about our Political Action Committee, or PAC, of the WMBA. She has a few words to share about that, and then we'll get going. Rosemarie, you're up.
Can you hear me okay, John?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, I was having some connectivity problems, and I am coming off being under the weather. So my apologies for my voice, but I'm thrilled to be able to be here tonight. And we thank you, Marty and Patience and Charlie, and certainly always Jessica Fortescue for all the work she does to help us with our folks that are carrying the torch all the time to progress on the various rulemaking and efforts to just improve things within our community. So excited to be with you here today. Myself and Anne Marie Bachman and Chris Salas from Washington Federal. We participate on our PAC committee to generate funds to be of meaningful advocacy to the issues, at the forefront that can change the housing opportunities, frankly, for the people that we serve day in and day out, that we care so deeply about in our community. So we appreciate all of those contributions and the efforts they've made. We love that you get to experience Jessica Fortescue here tonight, and her incredible talent, backed by just passion and a desire to do just really good, meaningful work. Like Jessica, we couldn't thank you enough. And so we just really wanted to say our appreciation to everyone who contributes in both funds and, even more importantly, efforts and their participation to try and move the needle. So glad to be here with you guys tonight. And thank you to our panelists for taking time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemarie. Continuing on, this will be the introductions. And once introduced, if you could just say hello, and then we'll come back and get the whole thing started here. But I'm just going to talk about Jessica Fortescue for just a minute. She's an attorney here in the state of Washington, part of the Washington Bar Association. And she's the principal of JF Consulting Services. And that's a big organization that does lots of wonderful things in the state since 2003. And Jessica is the lobbyist for the WMBA. Hello, Jessica.
Hi, John. Good to see everybody. And thanks for having me tonight.
All right. And we look forward to hearing more from you. And you can even tell us more about your background as you go on.
Sure.
Next, we have the director of Washington DFI, which is Charlie Clark. And Charlie was appointed to DFI as the director in 2019. He's been with DFI since 2012 and has held multiple roles there, was part of the Attorney General's office before that, and all of it started in private practice. Welcome, Charlie.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here with everyone.
All right. We look forward to talking to you more. And on the housing side of things, we have with us Marty Coistra. And Marty is the project manager behind a big thing that's going on in the state of Washington and elsewhere, the Black Home Initiative. And he's the project manager for Civic Commons. Marty, welcome.
Hey, great to be here with all of you. Thanks for having us.
All right. And finally, with us tonight, we have Patience Malaba, and she is the new executive director for the Housing Development Consortium. And she's been around the state for a while too. Welcome, Patience.
Thank you, John. Wonderful to be here.
All right. We're glad to have you all. And we're going to start right off with Jessica. And I know all of you guys sort of maybe interact with one another out there in the space, and you know what's going on. So as we have this discussion tonight, feel free to jump in and, just help each other out as we have this conversation. But Jessica, the first thing, maybe tell us what it's like. What is it in the day of the life of a WMBA lobbyist?
Oh, gosh. Well, right now we're really in the thick of everything. Session just started last Monday, and we just started our long set regular session, which is 105 days this year. The legislature kind of has a continuing process where we move through kind of a cutoff calendar and have, we consider bills and policies as well as the budget. So the primary focus this session is going to be passing operating, capital, and transportation budgets. We are right now in the thick of kind of the policy discussions in the first body. So each House and Senate member, they often introduce their own legislation and policies. And those bills, right now, I think we're almost at 900 bills introduced so far this session since beginning of session 8 days ago. So if that gives you any sense of the scope of where we are right now, we've got a lot of moving pieces. And then the committees will start, scheduling hearings on the bills that have some interest in and support. We testify and either, oppose or work to amend a bill or support a bill. So it's a pretty dynamic process. It takes a lot of work and effort, and it's, it definitely takes a village. So I work very collaboratively with a lot of folks in Olympia that try to align with our common interests. And I work closely with DFI and Charlie and his team on policies. And I've historically worked very closely with Marty and Patience as well. So there's a lot of overlap and partnership going on in Olympia as we move through the process. And then we'll move to, first cutoff. That means policy bills have to be out of their committees by that date. And then you kind of start to consider fiscal issues. So it's a really dynamic process again. And it kind of marches through. And as we move through, we narrow the scope of what's being considered. It's kind of a funnel, if you will. And I'm constantly, looking towards any bills or policies that could have either positive or negative impacts on WMBA. Monitoring things like taxes and housing is a huge issue this session. I think probably more than we've ever seen before. And it's top of mind of probably every legislator in the legislature at this moment, Republican, Democrat, east or west or side of the state. So it's just a really big issue that I think everyone's trying to tackle. So that means that our voice is important, and we are, dipping our toes into a lot of different policy areas that are sometimes outside of the scope of what we do as a business model, but trying to interact with different organizations and trying to help solve the problem and be proactive as well. So that's kind of a day in the life where, again, we're at the very beginning. It's kind of a fire hose at this point, where as we start to consider narrowing down the scope of what's going to be viable for this session. But it's a pretty exciting and busy time of the year for us. So,
yeah. In the way of updates and those kinds of things, what would you like to share with us?
Well, I think, as I said, housing is just really important right now. I think everyone acknowledges, from the governor's office to the legislature, that we've got to do some really big, bold moves in order to address our housing supply shortage. I think everybody is looking at, every possible solution. So looking to the team to figure out, hey, how can we be partners and encourage greater supply of housing to be developed? I think that's a pretty important component of what's on the table this session. And how can we help, first-time home buyers How can we help, make sure that minorities have access to homes as well and narrow that gap? And that's Eastern and Western Washington. So I think, trying to be creative and supportive and look at opportunities and ways we can be proactive, I think is really important this session. Continue to build those partnerships and work towards some better policies in our state that can help a lot of people across the state.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. We'll come back to a discussion too about maybe some of the other things that we can specifically do as an organization and our membership to support what you're doing.
Great.
But I wanted to jump over to Charlie and have him jump in right here where you left off. And partnership, so important. But Charlie, maybe tell us about your role, what's going on, and other things that you plan to just share with us tonight.
Sure. Thanks, John. And again, thanks for inviting me this evening. I look back and it's been almost 6 years since I spoke to the broader group of the WMBA, and time has flown. I know I've met with your board several times more recently, but I pulled up my slide deck, and the last time I talked with you, kind of my theme was embracing change. And when I look back at the topics, it seemed like just minor stuff. It was like, we had a new director at the time, Gloria Papis. Donald Trump was just elected president, and there was a thought on how would Dodd-Frank be reformed. And then if you fast forward to me be appointed director in 2019, I had about 10 months of smooth sailing. And what I mean by that is, I could do all the changes that I really thought were necessary. Things like, modifying our strategic plan and getting a quarterly newsletter out. But as I reflect back, I really didn't know what real change was, because when the pandemic hit, we already had people who were working remotely, examiners, but suddenly we had to send everyone home. What we found out was that we can do a lot of things remotely. We still carried out our essential functions. At our core, we license, register, and charter companies and individuals. We examine to make sure folks are complying with the law, and we investigate complaints and take enforcement action. And we were able to do all of that remotely. But we absolutely kind of lost something, I think, for some of our team members. What we saw over time is that the ability to collaborate and build teams and have on the job training opportunities. I think even supervision of employees was really impacted as well. And so what we decided as a management team was that a hybrid model would work a lot better for most of our employees. And so last year was a big kind of transition period. We brought most of our staff back to the headquarters. In April, we started some on-site component of exam work, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then we closed our Seattle office, which was a big deal. We gave up some of the office space that we were leasing, as I know many of your companies have done as well. And it's all worked out pretty well. I think we're starting to kind of hit our stride, but it certainly has been a year of change. As we kind of found that sweet spot with a hybrid environment, I would say one of the biggest challenges to get right is the examination work. I think most of your companies will find that it looks very different from before the pandemic. We aren't sending huge teams out. If we go on site, it's generally pretty thoughtful as to the number of people we send, whether it's even necessary. What does the space look like? Is management available? Do we have a benefit to be gained by going on site? And as for our banks and credit unions, our federal counterparts on site too. So a lot's kind of going into that. I see the model kind of changing throughout this year. I would like to kind of increase the on-site presence if we're able to, but that's where I see that going. Other date updates for the agency. We we received reaccreditation in many of our regulatory programs in 2021. We're accredited by our state regulatory associations. So our mortgage regulatory program was reaccredited, also banking program, credit union program. And we were very proud to be the third state banking regulator in the country to be accredited with our money transmission regulatory program. So that was a heavy lift for my staff. And then you probably noticed that last year was a big year with cannabis banking, and here in the state of Washington, you saw a lot of robberies. There were 2 murders that occurred in marijuana retail establishments, and that overlaps into banking. So, one concern is that there's so much cash in these retail establishments that they're easy targets. And so the governor's policy office set up a task force or a work group. DFI was included with that, with Liquor and Cannabis Board and various licensed marijuana retailers. And we heard from the public. What we heard was that a lot of the retailers really didn't know that some financial institutions were providing banking services. They didn't know about some payment solutions to get the cash out of those retail establishments. And so we provided a lot of resources available to these retailers on our website. And then the LCB helped with resources related to security. And we're hopeful that there'll be some federal solutions with maybe the model of the Safe Banking Act here in the coming year. We continue to be heavily focused on innovation and what's going on with fintech, with all of the kind of explosion of crypto models and other fintech models. We found that a lot of innovative companies really don't focus on regulation first. They focus on scaling their business model, and so we tried to provide better resources to help startups comply with the law and figure out whether they need a license. We have our Center for FinTech Information, which has a website and people available to help with those startups. And then just an update, I'll kind of skip to something that relates to all of your work, which is more mortgage focused. We saw a significant reduction in MLO renewals this last renewal season. They dropped 12,000 by the end of the year, and so we're down to around 22,000 licensed MLOs in the state of Washington. We have 365 mortgage brokers and 952 consumer loan companies. One thing that we've observed is, our sponsorships, MLO sponsorships, always averaged around 500 or so per month, and those spiked in the last half of the year up to around 1,300 to 1,400 per month. which makes sense. There were a lot of folks moving around. On the exams front, the Conference of State Bank Supervisors has a state examination system. You'll see that most of the consumer loan company exams are being done through that automated system, and it's a system where the company can upload information more easily, and then there's better sharing of information among regulators around the country through the state examination system. There is a desire to move mortgage broker exams onto that system, but we need to develop some more standardized procedures and policies around that as a group of states around the country. And I would mention, I mentioned the Conference of State Bank Supervisors. We've really been heavily focused on being active in those associations. I'm currently the vice chair. I sit on the board. Roberta Hollinshead, our director of banks, is also a board member. And so that's helped us kind of keep up with emerging issues. I think I'll stop there, John. I've talked enough, and I'm sure folks have questions too. So.
Yeah, that is a lot of information, but thank you for being with us. And we will come back to some questions very shortly. But I want to bring into the conversation Marty, and I know Patience works closely with him too. But Marty, we'll just start with you.
Well, thank you, John. And it's great to see Charlie. And I just have to say, Charlie and his team have been really big supporters and getting behind this Black Home Initiative work, and we can't thank them enough. And of course, I don't know, I suspect some of you are fortunate enough to understand how lucky you are to have Jessica on your team. But having been around this messy space of state legislative stuff for some years, she stands out as one of the very special people. So you are very, very fortunate. I hope you know that. I'm going to take just a minute and run through some slides really quickly, if you don't mind. These will be fast, but just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. And then I really want to get it to Patience, who can give you some more details of some, I think, really exciting opportunities that are in front of us. They're not going to be without challenge, but I think we're all up for it. So here we go. Way back in March of 21, the Washington Roundtable, Phyllis Campbell, Glenn from Washington Bankers, and a few others of us gathered to talk about the issues of BIPOC homeownership and the challenges and the disparities thereof. And around March of that year, towards the end of the month, we had our first summit of 124 people virtually helping craft the 7-point plan. Roughly a few months later, the Center for Community Investment approached Civic Commons with some resources from JP Morgan Chase to launch a 3-year effort in 6 cities. They chose Seattle as one of those 6 cities to focus on housing inequity. And that really is what launched the Black Home Initiative in March of last year. I should also add that Lisa Goldsmith is with us, I think, tonight. Lisa, a longtime friend and partner, is serving as a liaison between BHI and the WMBA broadly. That 7-point plan, if you haven't seen it, is available on the HDC and the BHI website, but it's a fairly comprehensive look about what we're trying to do. We're following this capital absorption framework, which simply means we have a shared priority. We have a pipeline that we're trying to create of housing and of buyers. There's 2 elements to that pipeline. And we're focusing on the enabling environment, which in essence is really, how do we ensure that the ecosystem has the capacity, the will, and the direction to meet the pipeline needs that'll achieve our shared priority, which is to make sure that that asset of owning a home is available to low and moderate income Black home buyers who desire it. We're starting off in South Seattle, South King County, North Pierce County. And of course, our ultimate desired impact is to deal with this plague of inequity that we have and the serious intergenerational Black household wealth gap, which makes it almost impossible for folks to find their way on this journey. 5 years from now, we hope to have 1,500 new Black LMI home buyers in that area I talked about, doubling that to 3,000 in 10 years. Not near enough, but a big improvement over where we are. And we certainly hope that the ecosystem that we create can probably generate capacity beyond that if we do this well. We have a core team of some key leaders in community that are helping drive this as a steering committee. And here's the most important slide in my mind, because I'm a visually oriented person. You look at the light blue at the top, it's about supply. The middle dark blue is about demand. And the bottom is about the ecosystem. And a piece of that ecosystem you'll see is around the policy framework. And that's where we want to hear more from patients in just a few minutes. It's going to take all elements of this. It's complex, it's comprehensive, but we believe we can do it in this market. We're going to have to do it by thinking differently. And that means that we hope that we can build a network mindset where it's less about organization and more about mission, where it's about humility rather than brand, trust, not control, and thinking like constellations rather than stars. Or in this case, moving off our old model of leadership based on the geese and thinking about a murmuration and how we really get there. How can we meet this moment? We have to change the systems. BHI has, through the work of HDC, the Seattle Foundation, and a whole host of folks, been working on a broad policy framework. The policy framework that we're pushing is really based on 4 key areas: funding, cost reduction, large-scale acquisition of land and value capture, and zoning and regulatory reform. Here you can see that framework lined up in some key areas, and patients will talk a bit more about these. The ones in bold are the ones that are on the state agenda right now. There's some key issues on zoning. I want to point out one thing on the large-scale acquisition of land, and that's HB 1111, housing benefit districts. This will be the 3rd time we've been going after this. It's all about changing the way we think about land acquisition and assemblage around high-capacity transit and doing it proactively rather than reactively, which allows us only to get the table scraps that are left over for affordable housing. And then there's the cost reduction and the funding pieces. You all know about the trust fund, future fund, and patients are going to talk about this covenant home ownership account. And I just want to say also, we're in deep dialogue with the group that's planning on how to use the $200 million reinvestment fund based on the support for communities impacted by drug abuse, drug use, and the sale of drugs. And 2 of the main topics that we're getting into with them relate to IDAs, getting a new IDA program in the state on homeownership, and also working on debt remediation. So let me stop there. Patients, why don't you pick it up? I'm going to drop Bambi's email address in the chat. She's helping coordinate the overall policy work in case any of you want to get a little closer to it. So patients, why don't you pick it up from there?
Well, thank you, Marty. And I get to be the last one who can thank all of you. So Jessica, for all of the great work you're doing at the state level and for being a great partner. Always appreciate working with you. And Marty, it's been refreshing to work with you on the other side. I think the last time I was here, I was actually representing Marty on this call. So glad to be here now as Executive Director at the Housing Development Consortium. And Charlie, it's just been wonderful to have your support for the Black Home Initiative. And I know Lisa is on the call, and she has been just an incredible champion in helping us get all of your engagement throughout the time. I won't walk through the policy framework. I'll spare you the details, but focus on one bill that I believe we have an opportunity to make change on. This is a bill that is coming up for introduction this week. It is called, and the name will give it away, a covenant home ownership account. What the bill does is it looks at the role that the state has played historically in discrimination. From the state courts that were enabling discrimination from property owners to the mandates that were requiring county auditors to record racially restrictive covenants, to some of the urban renewal related requirements. All of that is being looked at as a foundation of why we are here talking about the Black home ownership gap that we continue to see. Just to put that in perspective, in terms of home ownership across the state, BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous, and people of color collectively are 19% behind in terms of ownership behind the white households. But Black households are at 31% compared to white households that are at 68%. So what this bill will do is it creates a new revenue source. The revenue source is an assessment of real estate transactions. It's a $100 assessment. The funds go into an account. That's the Covenant's homeownership account. And then that account is going to be used in partnership with the Washington State Finance Commission to create a special purpose credit program, which will, for the first time, allow government to administer a race-conscious program. Because the program begins to say, we have not gone back to what brought us here, which was race-conscious legislation. And in order for us to remedy this, we still need an approach that's going to target those folks who are most impacted. And with the special purpose credit program, we will do down payment assistance support for households. And we will also support capital development. So that's pre-development costs, as well as some of the actual full development phase support for projects. In terms of how we get there beyond the Washington State Housing Finance Commission administering the program, they will be required to conduct a study to really know how to define eligibility criteria. Because we can talk about this from a place of passion, a place of concern, but we really want it to be baked by findings and data, so we're not out of compliance with fair housing laws. The special purpose credit programs are supported by the federal level regulation B. And through that is how we're able to get to a place of having this program that can really call out people who are most impacted. So now moving from the details of the bill to the strategy part, we have been working with Representative Frank Chop in coordinating some of the legislators. Representative Taylor is our champion on the House side, so she will be the prime to drive the bill. And then on the Senate side, we have the great leadership of Senator John Lobbyist, who is going to be championing from the Senate to get us across the finish line on the bill. We're working to get as many people as we can to sign in pro on the bill as it gets dropped. Because as all of you know, these are issues that sometimes divide us. They don't always unite us in terms of the path forward. And we're wanting to get to a place where with this bill, we can rise above that fray and get some consensus action. And we've talked to different partners across the board in getting this bill supported. I know there's some of our friends within the real estate industry, of course, that will be very concerned about a document recording fee. And that's a conversation we're having right now to think about how to right size and what's the best timing to still have a revenue source to support this great work, but also not impact the work on the ground. So that's the kind of engagement we are in now. We hope that you can be partners with us in thinking of how we get this bill to move forward. It'll be great to have a discussion or feedback point with all of you on how you would see this kind of legislation landing as an organization or as a collective. And then there's a lot of other bills that we could talk about, but I thought starting here would be a good place for us.
Very good. Thank you, Patience. A lot of good stuff, and I can see how you all work well together. We appreciate this. Before we get into questions and answers, I'm going to just run right through the panel with maybe a 30-second or 1-minute addition to anything else you'd like to say before we get into questions and answers. And I'll start with Jessica.
Sure. Thanks, John. And thanks for all of the important comments about what we do in Olympia. I think it's really important to engage the WMBA membership. And what I would add is that, I've been working with the WMBA for years now. I don't know, probably 10 or 11 years now, maybe longer, actually, now that I think about it, I'm getting old. But that being said, we've definitely seen a transition, I think, within our organization as leaders. Some of the original early leaders have transitioned out. So we just need to make sure we continue to engage our organization and our memberships and bring, new members in as new voices and just try to make sure that we have the people at the table that represent our organization, considering all of these proposals. As you can see, there are a lot of things that impact our businesses and our customers and the people that we serve. And so looking at those policies and weighing in on them and helping them move along, I think is really important for our industry, and reminding people that they can have a voice in what the policies look like. And it's just a really important thing to remind our members that we need to make sure that we continue to engage in the legislative process. It's really important. I know everybody is really busy, so it's always hard to commit time and energy towards this effort, but it's just really invaluable. And I can really only be as good as the members let me be. So that's what I would say is just an additional plug for making sure that the WMBA members recognize the important things that are going on in Olympia that we can engage in and support. So that's what I would add.
Thank you. Hey, Charlie, anything else?
Sure. Well, just listening to Marty and Patience, which they're doing some tremendous work. I think a little context from DFI's perspective might be helpful. In 2021, we brought a budget package to get funding to support the hiring of a diversity, equity, and inclusion director that would focus on narrowing the wealth gap. And so we have some funding to do that. And so DFI has been really committed to this work over the last year. I have to say that a lot of it's been just learning what's available and how can we provide support. So Patience had mentioned special purpose credit programs. Some of those can be offered, and I know some of your institutions are already offering them as a business model, and DFI's looked at, is there a way for us to provide support so that, even customers might feel more comfortable participating in one of those programs. We're looking at, is there multiple facets where DFI can just support these efforts? And then as far as kind of the history of policies that impacted housing and the wealth gap, I would say that's been a learning experience for me. And I'd encourage many of you on the call to, if you haven't kind of looked at that history, to do so. We were encouraged to read a book called The Color of Money by Professor Mirza Baradaran. And there was so much in there. I went to business school and law school, and it's not in the history books. It's not in the banking classes. At least it wasn't when I went through. I know we have some of that now. But it's just critical history and information if you're going to be in this space. We're having a CLE, continuing legal education for state employees. February 3rd, where Professor Broderon's coming to speak, and we're going to talk about the legal implications of narrowing the wealth gap. So we're doing work in this area, and part of it's just coming up to speed on what are the opportunities, where are the knowledge gaps, and so DFI has been very committed to that.
Thank you, Charlie. That is important work and good history to look at. Hey, Marty, we'll give you 30 seconds.
All right, John, I'll try to hold it to that. I mean, Jessica knows this, Patience does as well. I'm going to get philosophical with you for 20 seconds. The only way we were ever able in Seattle to pass a mandatory inclusionary zoning program was to get everybody to agree that they weren't going to get allowed to declare themselves a winner. In other words, it was all about compromise across sectors. And HDC, now 200 members strong, is made up of every sector possible. And Patience gets the fun of trying to dance in that policy space and keep everybody happy. I'm thankful I'm not in that space. But look, here's the facts. Washington State, the most regressive tax structure in the nation. It's not 42nd, it's not 48th, it's the most regressive. We have very few tools. We have a very significant disparity rate across races. Now is the time, folks. I know there are imperfections in the kind of sources that we're looking for. We don't want to pit homelessness, rental, or even opportunity for everybody against this effort. But this is a moment in time where we all got to figure out how can we do something really brave and bold, because it is the propitious moment. So that is all I'm going to share on that. And John, I can't thank you enough for the leadership you're providing at your organization in tapping into special purpose credit programs and all those kinds of things. And others of you are doing the same. Let's go, team.
All right. Thank you. And Patience, strategy, tactics, all that stuff together, you get the last word.
That's a tough act to follow, but I will just build on Marty and say the time is now. As you saw in the policy framework, we have a number of bill options for all of us to coalesce and support action. Jessica opened with that we have 900 bills so far. 2023 is declared the year of housing, and it's going to take all of us just leaning into the different tools that we need in our toolboxes. From the middle housing bill that just had a hearing just before this meeting, with very strong coalition-wide support, to the housing benefit districts bill that has a hearing on Thursday. I put a link in the chat for you. If you can sign in pro, just saying you support it makes a whole difference for us as we do the advocacy work. And then for this bill, if we can get to all of you supporting the Covenant's homeownership account, I think that would be a good place for us to be in. We do have some other bills that I think would get me in trouble, though, if I start talking about them with Jessica. But we do have some revenue bills that we're working on as well that will be coming through, and we'll be, to Marty's point, trying to get to that point of right sizing and building consensus to get those across the finish line.
Right. Thank you. And also just a quick shout out to Yana Nelson, who I know has joined as one of the co-chairs for the lending and underwriting section of this Black Home Initiative. And Lisa Goldsmith, thank you for your leadership and input for helping us get organized with it. As we move on, we're going to get into some question and answers, and Tanya is on the call. She's our program chair of the WMBA. I'm going to ask her to jump in here and help with just organizing the question and answers. So if you raise your hand, we will try to get to you. If you can use the little hand widget on the screen there. Raise your hand. We'll get to you and see it as quickly as we can. And Tanya, you'll help me make sure we get to everybody.
Yes, sir.
So-
Or you can put your question in the chat box.
Yeah, there we go. I'll let you lead this section, Tanya. We've got
Okay.
about 10 minutes to go.
Who's got a question? Well, I'll start. I have a couple questions.
All right.
Jessica, as far as this year, 2023 is the year of housing. I'm so pleased that we have you all on because I didn't know that. And, this is a year that definitely affects the WMBAs and the industry itself for us. So, two-part question. First one is, do you guys pattern after other states that maybe are ahead of Washington State on what they're doing here? Or are all these bills just created from the needs of certain organizations?
Yeah, so I would say that there's a lot of information sharing and policy sharing with other states, and Washington tends to pretty closely align with states like California and Oregon on the West Coast and other states. And so I think the legislators definitely glean ideas, concepts, best practices from other states. I think I'm sure other states, follow that same practice. There are a lot of kind of information gathering events over the interim where legislators can be educated and learn from other legislators or stakeholders. So it's definitely a process that can be locally driven. It can be very specific to local needs and what is specifically asked for by local constituents or local businesses or consumers or whatever. But some of them are certainly practices that legislators might have a specific goal in mind, and they might look to other states to see what is working and what's not. So definitely a lot of information gathering and from all over the place, I would say, and resources is an important part of the process. And then once you introduce a bill, of course, then you see, people can come from all over the place and have various positions on what your policies might be. So it's definitely a process that is meant for public engagement and information gathering to make it work and be successful.
Great. And then my second part question is for Marty, Jessica, and Patience, and you too as well, Charlie. What can the WMBA members do right now in the next few months to impact what it is that you're sharing? It's a drink through the fire hose. There's not where can we read the bills or see what it is that we can be interested in? Is there a resource?
Yeah, there's a lot of resources. So first, for WMBA members, you can be part of the Legal Legislative Committee. You can get added to the committee, and I share information daily, multiple times a day often, and weekly updates, and provide information on bills that have been introduced and get feedback from the members of that committee. And then we've had WMBA members testify in support of things. So we're always looking for people who are interested in engaging that process, because it's really important to get the feedback from people who have time and energy to commit to that. And then there's a lot of resources for the public. There's TVW, which is a TV channel 23, where it's live streams a lot of activities in Olympia. And then there's the legislative website, which is leg.wa.gov, which you can find any bill. And there's the RCW, so the statutory codes as well. So there's a lot of public resources available. And if anyone's interested in, engaging in that, and I'm happy to add people to the legislative committee and have people engage in that process. And so they can see kind of what's going on live, actually, because there is a lot of opportunity to weigh in. There's public testimony, there's signing in on bills, and it's happening pretty quickly and regularly at this point.
Yeah, if you're interested in being part of that, Amy has placed the email for getting on that list. It's in the chat. So there you go for how to resource or get to a hold of that resource.
And so
Great.
Patience and Marty, same question. What can we do now to get involved?
Sure. Patience, I'm going to let you tell folks how to get plugged into the BHI policy link work with Bambi and you. But I'm just going to share two things quickly, Tanya. One is have each of you do your best to challenge your friends, your colleagues, and your employees to think about participating in the legislative process. A lot of times when we hire lobbyists or certain people get to go to Olympia, we miss out on the fact that it's really important for the legislators to hear from the masses and the everyday folks. And so there are plenty of easy pathways, as Jessica has pointed out. Patients can show you how do you get plugged in, how can the average resident of Washington State lend their voice. The second is gather in small groups whenever you go to whatever water hole or place you go for coffee or whatever it is, and have conversations about these issues. To Charlie's point, most of what we learn about the issues that we're facing is too surfacey. It doesn't get us to a deep enough understanding to compel us to really understand what needs to happen. There are a lot of great books out there. There are a lot of great speakers. And if you guys host a house party of sorts at your shops or however you want to do it virtually, we'll come and we'll share with you the basics of the disparity studies that have been done and what we're up against. But it's a time to educate ourselves and to be open and to really try to figure out what we can do and how to engage in this process.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to drive home one other point that Marty emphasized, which is that it's really important for legislators to hear from the masses. Here's one thing that's true. You listen to ideas on policy and bills and you think, no brainer, that should pass. But the folks who really show up are the folks who oppose progress. So if we can get more voices of support that show up for these bills, even if it's just you signing in to say, hi, I am over here, I'm busy, but I support this just by adding my name to it. It speaks volumes for legislators. So ways for you to engage, just building on what Marty and Jessica shared, is we do have Bambi Chavez on the HDC policy team, who is coordinating the Black Home Initiative policy sub-network. Bambi is working on distilling a lot of the advocacy agenda items that are in the framework and helping people take advocacy action in an easy way. So she's one person to reach out to. But I would also offer, given that you already have a structure, that Bambi joins the legal legislative committee that you have, that Jessica was mentioning earlier, to just present on what else is happening related to BHI and how do you support that. And then I'll close off with the emphasis on the special purpose credit programs. I think we've had a lot more talk about, we've had a lot more people talk about special purpose credit programs. You have been doing this for the longest of time, but I think this is a time to begin to challenge each other to do this at a larger scale. It's also an opportunity with a bill like the one I referenced earlier for you to just come and talk to legislators about how these programs work from a private entity standpoint, and how can they, as government entities entering this field as the new players ever in history, learn from all of you on how you've run the programs over the years.
Right. Well, this has been amazing, and we are at time. So I want to say on behalf of the WMBA, thank you to patients, to Marty, Charlie, Jessica. We appreciate this information that you've shared today. And I hope the membership has been blessed by it and, encouraged and educated. This is all good. So thank you so much. Great program, Tanya, for putting this together. We thank you as well. And to everyone, have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.